In the gentle mists of time, we find ourselves drawn to understand the lives of women who lived centuries ago in an era we call medieval. These were times when the world moved at the pace of seasons, when communities were small and interconnected, and when women, despite facing tremendous challenges, displayed remarkable resilience and wisdom that echoes through the ages. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was a time of profound transformation across Europe. It was an era where life was intimately connected to the land, to the cycles of planting and harvest, to the rhythms of dawn and dusk. In this world, women occupied spaces that were both constrained and, in their own way, powerful. They were the keepers of households, the nurturers of children, the preservers of traditions, and often, the silent architects of survival for entire communities. Imagine, if you will, the soft morning light filtering through the wooden shutters of a medieval cottage. The air carries the scent of herbs drying in bundles, of fresh bread baking in stone ovens, of lavender tucked away in wooden chests. This was the world where women woke each day, not to alarm clocks or the rush of modern life, but to the gentle sounds of roosters calling, of church bells marking the hours, of children stirring in their simple beds. These women lived in a time when knowledge was passed down through generations, not through books, but through careful observation, through the gentle guidance of mothers teaching daughters, through the quiet wisdom shared between women as they worked together. They knew which herbs could soothe a fever, which prayers could comfort a grieving heart, which stories could help a child fall peacefully asleep. In the countryside, peasant women rose with the sun, their days filled with the essential work of survival. They tended gardens where they grew the vegetables that would sustain their families through long winters. Their hands knew the feel of good soil, the proper way to plant seeds, the delicate art of preserving food for the months when nothing would grow. These women were the keepers of life itself, understanding intimately the cycles that governed not just their crops, but their own bodies, their families, their communities. In the growing towns and cities, women crafted goods that sustained local economies. They were brewers, creating the ale that was safer to drink than water. They were bakers, rising before dawn to ensure fresh bread would be ready for their neighbors. They were seamstresses, creating not just clothing, but beautiful tapestries that brought warmth and beauty to cold stone walls. They were midwives, present at the moments when new life entered the world, possessing knowledge about birth and healing that was revered and essential. Even among the nobility, women navigated complex worlds with grace and intelligence. They managed vast households, oversaw the education of children, participated in the intricate diplomacy that kept kingdoms functioning. They were patrons of art and learning, ensuring that beautiful manuscripts were created, that music and poetry flourished, that knowledge was preserved for future generations. But perhaps most remarkably, these medieval women found ways to create beauty and meaning within the constraints of their time. They developed rich traditions of storytelling, passing down tales that entertained and educated. They created exquisite needlework that told stories through thread and fabric. They composed songs and prayers that expressed their deepest hopes and fears. They formed bonds of friendship and mutual support that sustained them through the challenges of their era. In monasteries and convents, women found spaces where learning could flourish. These religious communities became centers of education, where women could read and write, where they could study theology and philosophy, where they could create illuminated manuscripts of breathtaking beauty. Here, away from the demands of marriage and motherhood, some women found the freedom to pursue intellectual and spiritual growth that was rarely available elsewhere. The medieval woman's day began in darkness, often before the sun had touched the horizon. But this darkness was not empty or fearsome. It was filled with the soft sounds of a household waking, with the warmth of embers being coaxed back to life in the hearth, with a gentle routine of prayers and preparations that marked the beginning of another day in service to family and community. As we settle into this contemplation of their lives, we begin to understand that these women, living in what we might consider harsh times, possessed a deep connection to the essential rhythms of life that we have perhaps lost in our modern world. They understood the value of patience, of gradual progress, of finding joy in simple things. They knew that life was precious precisely because it was fragile, that community was essential because survival depended on mutual support. Their stories remind us that strength often lies not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet persistence of daily care, in the wisdom to work within limitations while slowly creating change, in the ability to find beauty and meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. As we journey deeper into their world, we carry with us this understanding of resilience, of wisdom born from necessity, of the profound strength that can emerge from apparent powerlessness. As the first hints of dawn begin to touch the medieval landscape, we find ourselves approaching the quiet understanding of how these remarkable women began their days. The transition from night to morning was a sacred time, marked not by the jarring interruption of modern alarms, but by the gentle, gradual awakening that nature herself provided. In the pre-dawn darkness, a medieval woman's day often began with the soft sound of church bells marking lauds, the morning prayer. These bells weren't harsh or demanding, but rather like gentle calls across the landscape, reminding communities that a new day was beginning. The sound would drift across fields and through village streets, a communal awakening that connected every household to the larger rhythm of medieval life. Picture a woman stirring in her simple bed, perhaps sharing the space with her children for warmth, the bedding made of rough linen stuffed with straw or feathers if the family was fortunate. The room around her is modest, with thick stone or wooden walls that have absorbed the stories of countless mornings like this one. The air is cool, carrying the fresh scent of night giving way to day, tinged perhaps with the smoke from banked fires beginning to be rekindled throughout the village. She rises not with hurry or stress, but with the measured pace of someone whose life is governed by natural rhythms rather than artificial deadlines. Her first movements are almost ritual-like, crossing herself in prayer, offering gratitude for another day of life. This wasn't mere habit, but a profound recognition that each day was a gift, that survival itself was something to be acknowledged and appreciated. The medieval woman understood that her day's work was essential not just to her family's survival, but to the well-being of her entire community. As she moves through her morning preparations, there's a sense of purpose that extends far beyond herself. She is part of an intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that give meaning to each task, no matter how simple it might appear. Outside her window, the world is slowly revealing itself in the growing light. If she lives in the countryside, she might see the mist rising from fields where a family grows barley and rye, where they tend sheep or pigs that will provide wool and meat for the coming year. The landscape is dotted with other cottages like her own, each sending thin streams of smoke into the morning air as hearth fires are awakened for another day of cooking and warmth. Her first task is often to rekindle the fire, a process that requires patience and skill. Using the embers that have been carefully banked through the night, she adds kindling with practiced precision, breathing gently to encourage the flames to catch. This fire is the heart of her home, providing not just warmth and the means to cook, but light to work by and a gathering place for her family. The process of lighting it each morning is meditative, requiring presence and attention that naturally centers her thoughts for the day ahead. As the fire begins to crackle and spread its warmth through the room, she moves to prepare the simple morning meal. This might be porridge made from oats or barley, bread from the previous day's baking, perhaps ale that she has brewed herself. The preparation is unhurried, each movement economical and purposeful. She has learned to waste nothing, to make the most of every resource, but this frugality doesn't feel like deprivation. Instead, it reflects a deep understanding of the value of what she has. If she has young children, they begin to stir as the warmth and light increase. Their awakening is gentle, marked by soft murmurs and the rustle of straw-filled mattresses. She tends to them with the patient care that medieval mothers cultivated out of necessity. Children were precious but fragile, and each day they remained healthy was cause for quiet gratitude. The woman's clothing is simple but practical, designed for the work ahead. She wraps herself in layers that will keep her warm as she moves between the heat of the hearth and the coolness of morning air. Her dress is made of wool or linen, depending on her family's means, but regardless of the material, it has been made to last, mended and remended as needed. This garment represents hours of work, from the shearing of sheep or growing of flax, through the spinning of thread and weaving of cloth, to the careful cutting and sewing that created the finished piece. As the morning light grows stronger, painting the walls of her home in soft gold, she begins to plan the day ahead. This planning isn't written in calendars or organized in digital devices, but held in her mind and heart, shaped by the season, the weather, the needs of her family and community. Today she might need to tend the garden, check on an elderly neighbor, participate in the communal baking that happens at the village oven, or work on the endless tasks of spinning, weaving, and mending that keep her family clothed. But underlying all these practical considerations is something deeper, a sense of connection to the generations of women who have faced similar mornings, similar challenges, similar opportunities to nurture and sustain life. She carries within her the accumulated wisdom of mothers and grandmothers, the knowledge passed down through careful observation and patient teaching. The medieval woman's morning routine was a form of meditation, though she might not have used that word. Each familiar task grounded her in the present moment while connecting her to the larger patterns of life. The rhythm of her movements, the careful attention to simple tasks, the awareness of her place in the natural and social world around her, all contributed to a sense of belonging and purpose that sustained her through whatever challenges the day might bring. As full daylight approaches, she stands for a moment at her doorway, looking out at the awakening world. The sight before her is one of quiet beauty. Other cottages with smoke rising from their chimneys, gardens beginning to show the green of growing plants, paths worn smooth by generations of feet walking between homes and fields and church. This is her world, bounded perhaps by the distance she can walk in a day, but rich with relationships, responsibilities, and the profound satisfaction that comes from work that directly sustains life. As the morning light strengthens and spreads across the medieval landscape, we find ourselves invited into the intimate spaces where these remarkable women created their daily sanctuaries. These were not grand chambers or elaborate halls, but simple, purposeful environments that became sacred through the care and intention with which they were tended. The medieval woman's home was her primary domain, but it was far more than mere shelter. It was a workshop, a school, a healing center, and a spiritual sanctuary, all contained within walls of stone, timber, or mud and wattle. Every corner of this space had been shaped by generations of women's hands, every surface marked by their work, their care, their determination to create beauty and comfort even within the constraints of their time. As we move deeper into this space, we begin to understand how these women transformed necessity into art, how they made the practical beautiful, and how they created environments that nurtured both body and spirit. The floors, whether of packed earth, stone, or wooden planks, are swept clean and sometimes scattered with herbs that release their fragrance underfoot. Lavender, rosemary, and sweet woodruff not only perfume the air, but serve practical purposes, repelling insects and creating a sense of freshness that counteracts the closed-in feeling of small spaces. The walls tell stories through their decorations. Even in the humblest homes, women found ways to bring beauty into their daily lives. Simple tapestries woven from scraps of colored wool, bundles of dried flowers hanging from wooden beams, pottery vessels shaped and painted by local craftswomen. These elements transform bare walls into expressions of creativity and hope. In more prosperous households, the walls might display embroidered hangings that took months or years to complete, each stitch a meditation, each pattern a prayer made visible. The heart of this sanctuary is the hearth, where fire provides warmth, light, and the means to transform raw ingredients into nourishing meals. But the area around the hearth is much more than a kitchen. It's a gathering place where stories are told, where children learn by watching and helping, where women share the wisdom accumulated over generations. The tools arranged near the fire speak of skills passed down through centuries. Iron pots blackened by countless meals, wooden spoons worn smooth by countless hands, knives sharpened and resharpened until their blades are thin but still effective. Along the walls, wooden shelves and chests hold the treasures of medieval domestic life. Here are stored the linens woven during long winter evenings, their surfaces soft from years of use and careful tending. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, their leaves crackling softly when the wind moves through the house. These herbs represent knowledge that took lifetimes to accumulate, which plants ease pain, which help children sleep, which can be used to dye cloth beautiful colors, which will preserve food through the lean months. In one corner stands the spinning wheel or simple spindle, tools that transform raw wool or flax into the thread that will become clothing, bedding, and household textiles. The rhythm of spinning was one of the most constant sounds in a medieval woman's life, a gentle whirring that provided background music to conversations, storytelling, and quiet contemplation. This work required such skill that a woman's spinning was often judged as an indication of her overall competence and value as a household member. The medieval woman moves through this space with the fluid efficiency of someone who knows every inch of her domain. She reaches for tools without looking, her hands guided by years of repetition. She adds wood to the fire in just the right amount to maintain steady heat for cooking. She adjusts the position of pots to ensure even cooking. She checks the bread dough rising in wooden bowls near the warmth of the hearth. Every movement is purposeful, economical, practiced. But within this efficiency, there is also a quality of mindfulness that modern life often lacks. Because resources are precious and replacement difficult, every action requires attention. The bread cannot be forgotten in the oven. The fire cannot be allowed to die. The spinning cannot proceed carelessly lest the thread break and work be lost. This constant attention to the present moment creates a natural state of meditation, a groundedness in immediate reality that connects the woman deeply to her work and her environment. As the day progresses and she moves through her tasks, the medieval woman is joined by others who share her space and her work. Children learn by observation and gradual participation, their small hands helping with simple tasks, their minds absorbing the knowledge that will sustain them throughout their lives. Other women might visit, bringing their own work to share the warmth of the fire and the pleasure of company. These gatherings are informal schools where knowledge is exchanged, where problems are solved collectively, where the isolation of individual households is broken by the strength of community bonds. The conversations that flow around the hearth cover every aspect of life. The best time to plant different crops, remedies for common ailments, news from other villages, stories that entertain and educate, prayers and songs that provide spiritual comfort. These women are the keepers of culture, preserving and transmitting the knowledge that holds their communities together. They are libraries and schools and healing centers all embodied in flesh and blood, carrying wisdom that cannot be found in any written source. In the quieter moments, when the immediate tasks are complete and the house settles into afternoon calm, the medieval woman might sit with her needlework, creating the embroidered altar cloths, the decorated clothing, the beautiful household linens that bring color and beauty into daily life. This work is both practical and artistic, serving immediate needs while expressing aesthetic sensibilities that transcend mere utility. The light filtering through small windows creates patterns that shift throughout the day, marking time more gently than any clock. The medieval woman learns to read these patterns, to know by the quality of light what time it is, how much work can be accomplished before darkness falls, when it's time to begin preparing the evening meal. This intimate relationship with natural light connects her to rhythms that have governed human life for millennia. As we settle more deeply into this contemplative space, we begin to understand that the medieval woman's sanctuary is not defined by luxury or ease, but by the intentional creation of meaning within whatever circumstances exist. These women understood that beauty can be created from the simplest materials, that community can flourish even in times of hardship, that spiritual peace can be found in the most ordinary tasks when they are performed with attention and care. In the gentle flow of medieval time, we now find ourselves immersed in the rhythms that govern the daily work and community life of medieval women. These rhythms were not imposed from outside, but arose naturally from the interaction between human needs and the cycles of nature, creating a pattern of life that was both sustainable and deeply satisfying in ways that our modern world often struggles to achieve. The medieval woman's work was never isolated or purely individual. Even the most private tasks were performed within a web of relationships that connected her to her immediate family, her neighbors, her village, and the larger rhythms of seasonal life. This interconnectedness created a sense of purpose that extended far beyond personal survival or advancement, embedding each woman's efforts within a larger tapestry of community well-being. As the morning progresses into the fuller light of day, we observe how seamlessly the medieval woman moves between different types of work, each transition marked not by the harsh interruption of schedules and deadlines, but by the natural completion of one task and the organic beginning of another. She might spend an hour tending her garden, carefully weeding around young plants, her hands dark with earth that smells of growth and possibility. This work connects her directly to the land that sustains her family, to the ancient knowledge of which plants thrive in which conditions, to the patient understanding that good things grow slowly but surely when tended with care. From the garden, she might move to check on her chickens, speaking to them in the gentle voice that experienced keepers use with animals. These birds provide eggs that supplement the family's diet and eventual meat for special occasions. But more than that, they represent a form of wealth that the woman can control, tend, and pass on to her daughters. The relationship between woman and chickens is one of mutual benefit, marked by daily rituals of feeding, gathering eggs, and ensuring the security of the coop. The rhythm of seasonal work provides structure to the medieval woman's year in ways that connect her intimately to natural cycles. In spring, there is the excitement of new growth, the careful planting of seeds saved from the previous year, the gradual emergence of green shoots that promise sustenance for the months ahead. Summer brings the intense work of tending growing crops, of making cheese and preserving foods, of preparing for harvest. Autumn is the time of gathering, of celebrating abundance, while simultaneously preparing for the lean months of winter. Winter itself becomes a time of different work, spinning, weaving, mending, storytelling, and the quiet tasks that sustain community bonds when outdoor work is impossible. But perhaps most remarkably, these seasonal rhythms are enhanced and supported by the community structures that medieval women created and maintained. The work of brewing, for instance, was often shared among several households, with women taking turns using large brewing equipment and sharing both the labor and the expertise required to create good ale. This cooperation ensured that no single household bore the full burden of this complex process, while also creating opportunities for women to gather, share knowledge, and strengthen the bonds that made community survival possible. Washing clothes, too, became a communal activity when women gathered at streams or communal washing facilities. The physical work of cleaning heavy woolen garments and linen was made lighter by shared effort. But more importantly, these gatherings provided opportunities for news to be shared, problems to be discussed, solutions to be found collectively. Young women learned not just the techniques of effective washing, but the social skills that would sustain them throughout their lives. The medieval woman's participation in market life reveals another aspect of how her work connected her to broader community rhythms. Whether she was selling surplus eggs, vegetables, or ale, purchasing needed items her household couldn't produce, or simply observing the social dynamics of market day, she was participating in an economic system that valued her contributions and recognized her expertise. These market interactions provided opportunities for women to develop business skills, to build relationships with suppliers and customers, to gain confidence in negotiating and decision-making. In the afternoon hours, when the most pressing tasks of the day have been completed, the medieval woman often turns to work that serves spiritual and cultural needs as well as practical ones. She might sit with other women to work on the elaborate embroidery that decorates church vestments, each stitch a prayer, each completed section a contribution to the beauty of community worship. Or she might participate in the collective work of preparing for seasonal festivals, creating the decorations, foods, and entertainment that mark important moments in the community calendar. The rhythm of weekly work is punctuated by the observance of religious holidays and seasonal celebrations that provide structure and meaning to the passage of time. These occasions require extensive preparation that brings women together in focused collaborative effort. The making of special foods, the preparation of decorations, the planning of entertainment, all create opportunities for women to share skills, strengthen relationships, and participate in the cultural life of their communities. As the afternoon light begins to soften and the shadows grow longer, the medieval woman's thoughts turn toward the evening meal and the gathering of her family around the hearth. This transition from day work to evening routine is marked by a gradual shift in pace, a movement from the more public aspects of her day toward the intimate rhythms of family life. She begins to prepare foods that will bring her household together, creating an environment that nurtures both body and spirit. The preparation of the evening meal is itself a form of artistry, requiring the transformation of simple ingredients into nourishing, flavorful dishes that satisfy both hunger and the deeper human need for comfort and beauty. Using techniques passed down through generations and adapted to available ingredients, she creates meals that are both practical and celebratory, marking the end of another day with gratitude and satisfaction. In the growing twilight, as cooking smells begin to fill the house and the sounds of the day gradually quiet, there's a sense of completion that comes from work well done, from contributions made to the well-being of family and community, from participation in the larger patterns that sustain life itself. The medieval woman's day has been filled not with the frantic activity of modern life, but with purposeful work that directly serves the needs of those she loves and the community that sustains her. This rhythm of work and community creates a sense of belonging that extends far beyond individual achievement or personal satisfaction. Each task completed contributes to a larger whole. Each skill developed serves not just the woman herself, but all those whose lives intersect with hers. In this interconnected world, individual well-being and community prosperity are so closely linked as to be inseparable, creating a sense of meaning and purpose that sustains these women through whatever challenges their era might present. As the day begins to settle into its quieter rhythms, we find ourselves drawn into the contemplative spaces that medieval women created within their daily lives. These were not separate from their work or their responsibilities, but woven seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary existence, creating opportunities for reflection, spiritual connection, and a deep peace that comes from aligned living. The medieval woman understood, perhaps more intuitively than we do today, that the sacred and the mundane were not separate realms, but different aspects of a unified existence. Her spiritual practice was not confined to formal religious services or special occasions, but permeated every aspect of her daily routine, transforming ordinary tasks into opportunities for prayer, meditation, and communion with the divine. As we settle into this understanding, we begin to appreciate how the rhythm of repeated tasks created natural opportunities for contemplative practice. The regular motion of spinning, for instance, with its gentle whirring sound and the requirement for steady, focused attention, naturally induced a meditative state. Women often prayed while spinning, the repetitive motion freeing their minds to commune with God, while their hands performed work that was essential for their family survival. The medieval woman's prayers were not abstract theological exercises, but intimate conversations with a divine presence she experienced as intimately involved in every aspect of her life. She prayed for her children's health, for favorable weather for the crops, for wisdom in household management, for strength to face whatever challenges might arise. These prayers arose naturally from the circumstances of her life, creating a constant dialogue between human need and divine provision. In the quieter moments of afternoon, when the immediate urgencies of the day have been addressed, the medieval woman might find herself drawn to her own small spaces of contemplation. Perhaps it's a corner of the garden where she tends herbs, a place where the practical work of cultivation becomes a form of meditation on growth, patience, and the mysterious process by which tiny seeds become plants that nourish and heal. Here, surrounded by the scents of lavender, rosemary, and thyme, she finds moments of peace that refresh her spirit and provide perspective on the day's challenges. Or perhaps her contemplative space is beside the window where she sits with her needlework in the afternoon light. Here, as her needle moves through fabric and patterns that have been handed down through generations, she experiences the satisfaction of creating beauty while participating in a tradition that connects her to countless women who have sat in similar windows, creating similar works of art, finding similar moments of peace in the midst of demanding lives. The medieval woman's relationship with nature was deeply contemplative, marked by careful observation and a sense of wonder that we might call scientific, but which she experienced as spiritual. She noticed which herbs grew best in which conditions, how the behavior of animals predicted changes in weather, how the cycles of the moon affected both plants and people. This attention to natural patterns created a form of ongoing meditation that kept her grounded in present moment awareness, while connecting her to larger rhythms that governed all life. Her participation in religious observances provided formal structure for contemplative practice, but these were extensions of, rather than separate from, the spiritual awareness that permeated her daily life. When she attended church services, she brought with her the prayers that had arisen from her work, the gratitude born from daily survival, the concerns that emerged from her responsibility for family and community well-being. The formal liturgy gave shape to spiritual experiences that were already deeply embedded in her ordinary existence. The evening hours brought their own opportunities for contemplation as the medieval woman prepared her family for rest. The rituals of evening meals, of checking on children, of banking the fire for the night, all provided occasions for reflection on the day that was ending and preparation for whatever the following day might bring. These weren't grand spiritual exercises, but simple moments of awareness that acknowledged the preciousness of life and the constant need for divine protection and guidance. In the growing darkness, as her household settled into sleep, the medieval woman often found her most profound moments of contemplative peace. Sitting beside the glowing embers of the evening fire, perhaps with a bit of mending in her hands, or simply in quiet stillness, she entered into that liminal space between day and night where the boundaries between ordinary consciousness and spiritual awareness become most permeable. These evening contemplations were times of integration, when the experiences of the day were processed and understood within the larger framework of meaning that governed her life. She might reflect on moments of particular beauty or challenge, on lessons learned through success or failure, on the subtle signs that suggested how best to approach tomorrow's work. This wasn't formal theological reflection, but the natural wisdom that arises from a life lived in close connection to fundamental realities. The medieval woman's contemplative practice was also deeply communal, expressed through shared rituals, collective prayers, and the informal spiritual direction that women provided for each other through conversation and example. When women gathered for work or celebration, they created spaces where spiritual wisdom could be shared, where questions could be explored, where the challenges of faithful living could be discussed openly and supportively. Her understanding of prayer extended far beyond formal petitions to include what we might now call mindfulness or presence. The careful attention required for successful cooking, the patient focus needed for effective spinning, the gentle awareness involved in tending children or caring for the sick all became forms of prayer when performed with conscious intention and gratitude. As we immerse ourselves more deeply in this contemplative dimension of medieval women's lives, we begin to understand that their spiritual practice was not an escape from worldly concerns, but a way of engaging with those concerns from a place of deeper wisdom and peace. Their prayers did not ask for release from responsibility, but for the strength and wisdom to fulfill their responsibilities with grace and effectiveness. The medieval woman's contemplative spaces were not separate from her work, but embedded within it, not reserved for special occasions, but woven into the ordinary fabric of daily existence. This integration created a form of spiritual life that was both deeply practical and profoundly transcendent, addressing immediate needs while connecting the practitioner to sources of meaning and peace that sustained her through whatever challenges her era might present. In this understanding, we find a model of contemplative living that remains relevant and inspiring, showing us how ordinary life can be transformed into spiritual practice when approached with conscious intention, grateful awareness, and trust in the larger patterns that govern and sustain all existence. As evening approaches and the medieval world settles into its gentler rhythms, we find ourselves contemplating the profound wisdom that these remarkable women developed through their daily encounters with life's fundamental realities. This wisdom was not learned from books or formal instruction, but emerged from direct experience with birth and death, abundance and scarcity, joy and sorrow, creating an understanding of life that was both practical and deeply spiritual. The medieval woman's wisdom was born from necessity, but transcended mere survival strategy to become something approaching philosophy. Through years of managing households with limited resources, she developed an intuitive understanding of priorities that enabled her to focus energy and attention where they would be most effective. She learned to distinguish between what was essential and what was merely desirable, between problems that required immediate action and those that would resolve themselves with patience and time. This wisdom manifested in countless small decisions throughout each day. She knew when to spend precious resources on immediate needs and when to save them for future challenges. She understood how to allocate her time and energy among competing demands, how to care for others without depleting herself, how to maintain hope during difficult periods while still taking practical steps to improve her circumstances. Her relationship with uncertainty taught her a form of trust that modern life often struggles to achieve. Living in an era when crop failure, disease, or other catastrophes could dramatically alter circumstances overnight, the medieval woman learned to hold her plans lightly while still working diligently toward her goals. This wasn't passive resignation, but active faith, a willingness to engage fully with life while remaining open to unexpected changes in direction. The wisdom she developed around relationships was particularly profound, emerging from the recognition that individual survival was impossible without community support. She learned how to give without keeping score, how to ask for help without shame, how to resolve conflicts without destroying essential bonds, how to build trust through consistent small actions rather than grand gestures. These relationship skills were not simply social niceties, but survival strategies in a world where isolation could mean death. Her understanding of children and their development was remarkably sophisticated, based on close observation of countless young people as they grew from infancy to adulthood. She knew which behaviors were normal phases that would pass naturally and which required intervention. She understood how to teach essential skills without destroying a child's natural curiosity and initiative. She recognized the importance of balancing protection with the gradual increase of responsibility that prepared young people for adult life. The medieval woman's knowledge of healing emerged from a combination of careful observation, traditional remedies passed down through generations, an intuitive understanding of the connections between emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. She knew which herbs could ease pain, which foods provided strength during illness, which activities promoted healing, and which hindered it. More importantly, she understood that healing involved not just the body, but the whole person, requiring attention to emotional and spiritual needs, as well as physical symptoms. Her relationship with work had a quality that we often miss in our modern understanding of labor. She saw work not as a burden to be endured, but as a form of creative expression and spiritual practice. Even the most routine tasks became opportunities for excellence, for beauty, for the quiet satisfaction that comes from competence and completion. This attitude transformed necessary labor into a source of meaning and pride rather than mere drudgery. The medieval woman's understanding of time was profoundly different from our modern relationship with chronology. Rather than seeing time as a limited resource to be maximized and controlled, she experienced it as a natural flow with its own rhythms and patterns. She learned to work with these rhythms rather than against them, to accomplish tasks when conditions were most favorable rather than according to arbitrary schedules, to recognize that some things simply could not be hurried no matter how urgently they seemed to be needed. Her relationship with beauty was both practical and transcendent. She understood that beauty was not a luxury to be added to life when basic needs were met, but an essential component of human well-being that needed to be cultivated even in the most challenging circumstances. She found ways to create beauty from whatever materials were available, to bring color and pattern and texture into environments that might otherwise be stark and utilitarian. The spiritual wisdom that permeated her daily life was remarkable for its integration of faith with practical action. She prayed not as an escape from worldly concerns, but as a way of approaching those concerns with greater wisdom and peace. Her faith didn't promise that life would be easy, but provided the strength and perspective needed to face whatever challenges arose. She understood that spiritual life was not separate from ordinary existence, but was the foundation that gave meaning and direction to all other activities. Perhaps most profoundly, The medieval woman developed a form of courage that was both humble and heroic. She faced the genuine dangers and hardships of her era, not with reckless bravado, but with quiet determination, careful preparation, and trust in resources beyond her own limited strength. This courage enabled her not just to survive, but to create meaning, beauty, and joy even in circumstances that modern people might find overwhelming. Her wisdom around suffering was particularly mature, based on the recognition that pain and loss were inevitable aspects of human existence that needed to be faced rather than avoided. She learned how to grieve without becoming trapped in despair, how to support others through their difficulties without being overwhelmed by them, how to find meaning and growth even in experiences that initially seemed purely destructive. As we contemplate this deep wisdom, we begin to understand that the medieval woman's knowledge was not simply a collection of useful information, but a coherent worldview that enabled her to navigate life with grace, purpose, and resilience. Her understanding was holistic, recognizing the interconnections between all aspects of existence and the importance of maintaining balance among competing needs and demands. This wisdom was transmitted not through formal education, but through modeling, story, and gradual initiation into adult responsibilities. Young women learned by observing their mothers and other experienced women, by participating in increasingly complex tasks, by listening to the stories and advice shared during communal work, by gradually taking on more responsibility as their competence developed. In the quiet moments of evening, as the medieval woman reflected on the day's experiences and prepared for rest, she drew upon this accumulated wisdom to process new challenges, to find meaning in both successes and failures, to maintain perspective on the larger patterns that govern her life. This wasn't abstract philosophical reflection, but practical wisdom applied to immediate circumstances, creating a form of ongoing education that continued throughout her lifetime. In the deepening quiet of evening, as shadows lengthen and the medieval world prepares for night's embrace, we find ourselves drawn into those transcendent moments when a medieval woman's daily experience touched something beyond the ordinary boundaries of time and circumstance. These were not separate from her practical life, but emerged from within it, like flowers blooming from well-tended soil. The medieval woman's encounter with transcendence often arose from the most humble circumstances. Standing in her garden at twilight, watching the last light of day illuminate herbs she had planted and tended, she might experience a moment of profound connection to the creative forces that govern all growth and change. The small miracle of seeds becoming plants, of plants providing healing and nourishment, of life perpetually renewing itself despite apparent death, opened windows into mysteries that formal theology could describe but not fully contain. These moments of transcendent awareness were woven seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary experience. As she kneaded bread, feeling the dough transform under her hands from a collection of separate ingredients into a unified substance that would nourish her family, she participated in a daily mystery of transformation that connected her to the deepest patterns of existence. The bread she made was simultaneously practical sustenance and spiritual symbol, ordinary food and sacred offering. Her experience of childbirth and the care of infants provided perhaps the most profound encounters with transcendent reality. Participating in the mysterious process by which new life entered the world, she witnessed creation itself in its most intimate and immediate form. The responsibility of nurturing these new souls from complete helplessness to capable adulthood gave her direct experience of the creative love that sustains all existence. In the quiet moments of nursing an infant or comforting a frightened child, she touched the source of all compassion and care. The medieval woman's relationship with death also opened doors to transcendent experience. In an era when life was more fragile and death more present than in our modern world, she developed a mature acceptance of mortality that paradoxically deepened her appreciation for life. Caring for the dying, preparing bodies for burial, comforting the grieving, she participated in the great transitions that mark human existence, gaining wisdom about the temporary nature of earthly concerns and the enduring reality of love. Her participation in seasonal cycles provided regular opportunities for transcendent experience as she witnessed the annual death and rebirth of the natural world. The gradual emergence of green shoots from apparently lifeless winter soil, the transformation of barren trees into sources of fruit and shade, the reliable return of warmth and light after months of cold and darkness, all provided tangible experiences of resurrection that informed her understanding of spiritual realities. The work of her hands often became a pathway to transcendent states. As she spun thread from raw wool, transforming rough fiber into material that could become beautiful and useful cloth, she participated in a process of gradual transformation that mirrored spiritual development. The rhythm of the wheel, the feel of fiber flowing through her fingers, the meditative repetition of familiar motions, all contributed to states of consciousness where ordinary awareness expanded into something larger and more peaceful. Her participation in communal worship provided formal structure for transcendent experience, but these moments were enriched by the spiritual awareness she cultivated throughout her daily life. When she joined her voice with others in prayer and song, when she participated in rituals that connected her community to sacred story and meaning, she brought to these formal observances a heart already attuned to divine presence through countless ordinary encounters with mystery and beauty. The medieval woman's experience of transcendence was often mediated through relationship rather than through solitary spiritual practice. In moments of deep connection with her children, when love flowed so freely that individual boundaries seemed to dissolve, she touched something universal and eternal. In experiences of community solidarity, when neighbors came together to help each other through crisis or celebration, she participated in a form of love that transcended individual concerns and connected her to the divine compassion that sustains all existence. Her encounters with beauty provided regular openings to transcendent experience. The sight of morning mist rising from fields, the sound of birds singing at dawn, the feel of soft fabric emerging from her loom, the taste of bread fresh from the oven, the scent of flowers blooming in her garden, all became gateways to appreciation so profound that it approached worship. These experiences reminded her that existence itself was a gift, that the ordinary world was saturated with wonder for those who learned to see with grateful eyes. Even experiences of hardship and challenge could become doorways to transcendent understanding. In moments when her own resources proved inadequate to meet the demands placed upon her, she discovered reserves of strength and wisdom that seemed to come from beyond her individual capacity. These experiences taught her humility, but also trust, showing her that human limitations could become openings for divine grace when approached with faith and openness. The medieval woman's practice of prayer was itself a form of transcendent experience, creating moments of intimate communion with divine presence that sustained and guided her through all the complexities of daily existence. Her prayers were not formal recitations, but heartfelt conversations, expressions of gratitude, requests for guidance, offerings of love and concern for those around her. Through prayer, she maintained conscious connection to the sacred source that gave meaning and direction to all her activities. As night deepened and her household settled into sleep, the medieval woman often found her most profound experiences of transcendent peace. In the quiet darkness, with the day's work completed and her family safe around her, she entered into states of rest that were more than mere physical recuperation. These were times of spiritual renewal, when the accumulated stress and concern of daily existence dissolved into a deeper trust in the fundamental goodness of creation. Her experience of transcendence was not escape from worldly reality, but deeper engagement with it, a recognition that ordinary existence was itself sacred when approached with proper awareness and intention. The divine presence she encountered was not separate from daily life, but present within every moment, every task, every relationship, waiting to be recognized and celebrated by those who learn to see with eyes of faith. In these transcendent moments, the medieval woman touched the eternal dimension of existence that gave ultimate meaning to her temporal concerns. She discovered that her daily work of nurturing and sustaining life was participation in the ongoing creativity of the universe itself, that her love for family and community reflected the divine love that created and sustains all existence, that her patient endurance of hardship and her grateful celebration of joy were both forms of worship that honored the source of all being. These experiences of transcendence were not rare mystical events, but regular features of a life lived in conscious relationship with the sacred dimension of existence. They provided the perspective and strength that enabled her to face whatever challenges arose with equanimity and grace, secure in the knowledge that her life was held within a larger pattern of meaning that transcended individual circumstances while honoring the unique contribution that only she could make. As the last light of day fades into the soft embrace of evening, we find ourselves accompanying the medieval woman as she begins the gentle transition from the active engagement of daytime to the restorative peace of approaching night. This transition is not abrupt, but flows naturally from the day's completion, marked by rituals and rhythms that prepare both body and spirit for the healing rest that darkness brings. The medieval woman's evening routine begins as the sun touches the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that speak of completion and gratitude. She moves through her final tasks of a day with the satisfaction that comes from work well done, from responsibilities faithfully fulfilled, from another day successfully navigated with grace and purpose. There is no rushing in these moments, no anxiety about unfinished tasks, but rather a peaceful acceptance of what has been accomplished and a trust that tomorrow will bring its own opportunities for service and growth. Her first evening task is often the preparation of the final meal of the day, a simple gathering of foods that will bring her family together around the warmth of the hearth. This meal is more than mere sustenance. It is a daily celebration of survival, a moment of thanksgiving for the day's provisions, a time when the scattered activities of individual family members converge into the shared intimacy of home. The preparation of this meal becomes a meditation on abundance and gratitude, a recognition that even the simplest foods represent countless gifts: the sun that warmed the grain, the rain that helped it grow, the hands that harvested and ground it, the knowledge that transformed it into nourishing bread. As her family gathers for this evening meal, the medieval woman experiences one of the day's most profound satisfactions. Around the simple wooden table or gathered near the fire's warmth, she sees the fruits of her daily labor reflected in the faces of those she loves. The bread she baked provides sustenance for growing bodies. The vegetables she tended in her garden contribute flavor and nutrition to the meal. The ale she brewed offers refreshment and the mild relaxation that eases the transition from work to rest. The conversation that flows around the evening meal is itself a form of blessing, connecting family members to each other's experiences while reinforcing the bonds that hold the household together. Stories are shared about the day's work and discoveries. Plans are discussed for tomorrow's tasks. Problems are aired and solutions suggested. Through these ordinary exchanges, the medieval woman fulfills one of her most important roles as the keeper of family unity and communication. As the meal concludes and the simple wooden bowls are cleared away, the medieval woman begins the quiet tasks that prepare her home for night's arrival. The fire is carefully banked with ashes to preserve embers that will rekindle tomorrow's warmth. Windows are shuttered against the cool night air. Doors are secured with the heavy wooden bars that provide protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep. These practical preparations create a sense of security and containment that helps ease the psychological transition from the open alertness of day to the receptive vulnerability of rest. Her children's bedtime routine provides some of the evening's most tender moments. She helps small hands with the simple ablutions that mark the end of day. She listens to whispered prayers that place the night's journey under divine protection. She shares the stories and songs that have been passed down through generations, weaving around her children the cultural inheritance that will sustain them throughout their lives. These bedtime rituals create a bridge between the conscious world of daily activity and the mysterious realm of dreams and rest. As her children settle into sleep, their breathing growing deep and regular in the growing darkness, the medieval woman finds herself entering into the day's most peaceful moments. The house around her settles with small sounds of cooling wood and shifting stones. Outside, the world transforms under the cover of darkness, taking on the different character that night brings to familiar landscapes. But inside her small domain, all is security and peace, held safe by the daily rhythms that have been faithfully maintained. In these quiet evening moments, the medieval woman often turns to the handwork that provides both productivity and meditation. By the gentle light of oil lamp or candle, she might work on embroidery that will eventually become an altar cloth, each stitch a prayer, each completed section a contribution to the beauty of communal worship. Or she might spin thread from the wool that will be woven into cloth during the longer evenings of winter. Or she might simply sit in peaceful stillness, allowing the day's experiences to settle into wisdom and the day's tensions to dissolve into rest. Her thoughts during these evening hours often turn to reflection and gratitude. She reviews the day's events, not with anxiety or regret, but with a gentle evaluation that helps her learn from experience and prepare for future challenges. She gives thanks for the day's provisions, for her family's health and safety, for the community relationships that sustain her household, for the countless small gifts that made the day possible. This practice of grateful reflection creates a sense of completion that enables peaceful rest. The medieval woman's preparation for sleep is itself a spiritual practice, marked by prayers that place the night hours under divine protection and commend her loved ones to God's care. These prayers emerge naturally from the day's experiences and concerns, connecting her immediate circumstances to the larger patterns of meaning that govern her existence. Through prayer, she releases the day's accomplishments and challenges into hands more capable than her own, finding the peace that comes from trust in providence that extends beyond human understanding. As she prepares her own simple bed, adjusting the straw-filled mattress and arranging the woolen blankets that will provide warmth through the night, she performs these tasks with the same careful attention she brings to all her work. Even these final preparations become forms of self-care that honor the body's need for rest and restoration. The bed itself becomes a sanctuary within the sanctuary of her home, a place where the day's labors give way to the healing rest that enables tomorrow's service. In the growing stillness of full darkness, as her household settles into the deep quiet of night, the medieval woman finds herself embraced by a peace that transcends mere physical rest. This is the peace that comes from a life lived in harmony with natural rhythms, from work that directly serves essential needs, from relationships that provide both meaning and support, from spiritual practices that connect daily existence to eternal realities. The transition from waking consciousness to sleep becomes a gentle surrender, not a collapse from exhaustion, but a conscious yielding to the restorative processes that operate during rest. She releases the day's concerns not from forgetfulness, but from trust, knowing that tomorrow's grace will be sufficient for tomorrow's needs. Her last conscious thoughts are often of gratitude and blessing, prayers that extend protection and peace to all those she loves and to the larger community that sustains her life. In the profound stillness of deep night, we find ourselves drawn into the most sacred hours of the medieval woman's day, when the active engagement with worldly concerns gives way to the mysterious journey of sleep and dreams. This transition into night's embrace is not merely the absence of waking consciousness, but a positive entry into a different realm of existence, one that offers healing, renewal, and a deep restoration that enables each new day's service. As the medieval woman settles into her simple bed, surrounded by the protective walls of her home and the gentle breathing of her sleeping family, she experiences a sense of completion that goes far beyond mere physical rest. The day that began with morning prayers and the rekindling of the hearth fire now concludes with evening prayers and the banking of flames that will preserve warmth until dawn's return. This circular rhythm creates a sense of wholeness that embraces both activity and rest as equally sacred aspects of human existence. The darkness that surrounds her is not empty or frightening, but full of peaceful presence. She has learned to trust the night as a time of healing and restoration, when the body repairs itself from the day's labors and the spirit renews itself through communion with the divine mysteries that operate beyond ordinary consciousness. The sounds of night, the gentle rustling of wind through thatch, the distant call of an owl, the quiet settling of wooden beams, create a natural symphony that speaks of the larger rhythms that govern all existence. Her bed, though simple, becomes a sanctuary within the sanctuary of her home. The straw-filled mattress that supports her body represents countless hours of harvest work, of gathering and preparing the materials that provide this basic comfort. The woolen blankets that warm her were created through the patient work of many hands. Shepherds who tended flocks, women who sheared sheep and cleaned wool, spinners who created thread, weavers who transformed thread into cloth. Even in sleep, she is surrounded by the fruits of communal labor and the evidence of human cooperation in meeting essential needs. As consciousness begins to fade and the boundaries between waking and sleeping blur, the medieval woman enters into a state of trust that modern life often finds difficult to achieve. She releases control over circumstances beyond her influence, while maintaining confidence that the larger patterns governing existence will continue to unfold according to divine wisdom. This trust enables a quality of rest that goes deeper than mere physical recuperation, reaching into the spiritual dimensions of human existence. The night hours bring their own forms of blessing and renewal. In dreams, she often finds herself continuing the relationships and concerns that fill her waking hours, but freed from the limitations and anxieties that constrain ordinary consciousness. She dreams of gardens where plants grow with supernatural abundance, of spinning wheels that create thread of impossible fineness, of children who are always safe and healthy, of communities where cooperation flows without conflict or strain. Sometimes her dreams carry her back to earlier times in her life, allowing her to revisit moments of particular joy or significance with the wisdom of accumulated experience. She might find herself again a young woman learning to spin from her mother's patient instruction, or celebrating a harvest festival with friends long since gone to their eternal rest. These dream journeys provide continuity with her past, while offering perspective on present circumstances. Other dreams open doorways to possibilities that transcend ordinary experience, showing her visions of beauty and meaning that inform her waking spiritual life. She might dream of conversations with saints or angels, of participation in heavenly worship, of understanding that illuminates the deepest questions about existence and purpose. These dreams are received not as mere products of imagination, but as authentic spiritual experiences that provide guidance and comfort for daily life. The deepest hours of night often bring the most profound rest, when even dreams fade into the peaceful darkness that enables complete restoration. In this state, the medieval woman participates in the cosmic rhythm of rest that governs all creation, joining with the earth itself in the daily cycle of activity and repose that maintains the balance necessary for continued existence. This is rest that acknowledges the fundamental human limitation while trusting in the divine power that sustains all life. As the night progresses toward dawn, the quality of sleep often becomes lighter, preparing body and spirit for the gradual return to waking consciousness. In these pre-dawn hours, she might experience the gentle stirring of dreams that preview the day ahead, offering insights about how to approach particular challenges or opportunities that await her attention. These transitional moments provide a bridge between the restoration of night and the engagement of day. The medieval woman's relationship with sleep is informed by her understanding that rest itself is a form of prayer, a conscious surrender to the divine providence that governs existence. She enters sleep not as an escape from spiritual life, but as a deeper entry into it, recognizing that the unconscious hours offer their own forms of communion with the sacred sources that sustain all existence. Her trust in the night's protection extends beyond her own individual rest to encompass her entire household and community. She sleeps peacefully knowing that the same divine care that has sustained her through the day will continue to operate during the night's vulnerable hours. This trust enables the complete relaxation that makes truly restorative sleep possible, freeing her from the anxiety and vigilance that would prevent healing rest. In the profound silence of deepest night, when even the sounds of settling timbers and distant animals fade into stillness, the medieval woman experiences a peace that touches the eternal dimensions of existence. This is not merely the temporary absence of daily concerns, but positive participation in the divine rest that underlies all activity, the primordial peace from which all creation emerges and to which it returns. As the first hints of dawn begin to touch the eastern horizon, still hours away from full awakening, she rests in the perfect trust of one whose life is held within patterns larger and more reliable than individual understanding can grasp. Her sleep becomes a form of worship, an offering of confidence in the goodness of creation and the wisdom of the divine plan that governs all existence. The night's gentle embrace holds her securely, providing not just physical restoration, but spiritual renewal that prepares her for whatever the new day might bring. In sleep, she participates in the mystery of daily death and resurrection that marks human existence, trusting that she will awaken refreshed and ready to resume her service to family, community, and the larger purposes that give meaning to her life. And so the medieval woman rests in perfect peace, surrounded by the love that sustains her daily life and embraced by the divine presence that never sleeps, never wearies, never fails to provide for those who trust in its eternal care. Her sleep becomes a prayer without words, a surrender without fear, a journey into the heart of existence where all questions find their answer in the simple recognition that life itself is gift, that love is the fundamental reality, and that rest in divine care is the deepest form of human blessedness. In this sacred sleep, she finds the restoration that enables tomorrow's service, the peace that informs tomorrow's challenges, and the trust that sustains tomorrow's hopes. The night's gentle embrace holds her safely until dawn's return invites her once again into the beautiful rhythm of daily existence, refreshed and renewed for another day of faithful living in service to love's eternal purposes.